Hello, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. Against the backdrop of Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi's visit to the Russian capital, reports are emerging that Tehran is dissatisfied with the role Moscow is playing in the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran, and is demanding greater support from Russian President Putin. Abbas Araghchi brought an official letter to the Russian capital from Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, which specifically and personally demands that Putin be more active in supporting Tehran. However, the question arises, what can the Russian president actually do in a situation involving an exchange of missile strikes between Iran and Israel, as well as American bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities? Even if we imagine a ground operation on Iranian territory, Russia would hardly intervene in what was happening. All the more so because against the backdrop of the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war, Russia simply does not have any extra troops. This is evidenced by the weakening of Moscow's positions in African countries and in Syria. It is also obvious that Russia cannot help Iran when it comes to strikes on Iranian territory by Israel or the United States. After all, it was Russia that relied on Iranian drones and missiles, not the other way around. Thus, Moscow does not have any additional military industrial potential that could help Iran in its fight against its enemies. At the same time, the Russians are also trying to pretend that they are acting this way and not otherwise, within the framework of agreements with Iran itself. Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, read out the relevant articles of the Russian-Iranian Strategic Partnership Agreement on air. These articles emphasize that if one of the countries participating in the agreement is subjected to aggression, the other is obliged not to provide any advantage to the aggressor country. And this, from Russia's point of view, is exactly what the Kremlin is doing now. And then a rather simple question arises, says Maria Zakharova to journalists. So who are these provocateurs who are calling on Russia to help Iran more? Well, obviously, these are the very same provocateurs who have listened to the statements of Putin and Maria Zakharova herself about the outstanding geopolitical role of the Russian Federation and believed all that chatter. And perhaps among those who believed all this chatter was Ayatollah Khamenei himself, who is now making corresponding requests to the Russian president. Putin really is in a difficult situation. He needs to at least maintain a normal atmosphere in his communication with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, because it is precisely this normal atmosphere that helps Putin in his attacks on Ukraine and in his hope for the capitulation of the hated country, a war on which one could say Putin has staked all the cards tied to his own political future. Putin needs to preserve the potential for further strikes against Ukraine and to try to occupy new Ukrainian regions. And at the same time, Putin needs to demonstrate that his country remains an important global player. But in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the reluctance to quarrel with the American president, achieving the latter is practically impossible. The fact that Putin has effectively left Iran to its fate is a continuation of his previous geopolitical defeats. Let us recall, for example, that Russia was essentially unable to do anything for Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. When the Syrian opposition began moving toward Damascus, the Russians were more likely to simply acknowledge these events as they unfolded than to help the Syrian president retain power. The very fact that Bashar al-Assad, together with his family, was granted asylum on the territory of the Russian Federation can be considered a major political achievement for him. And this is despite the fact that, unlike in Iran, Russia has bases on Syrian territory that are essential for the logistics of all its operations on the African continent. And we can already see how the loss of this logistics is having an impact on Russia's own positions in African countries, as well as on the capabilities of those African military regimes that have emerged on the political map of Africa thanks to Russian support. The same can be said about the post-Soviet space. Over the past almost 4 years, the influence of the Russian Federation on events in the former Soviet republics has been decreasing with each passing month. The last major Kremlin operation was Russian troop deployment in Kazakhstan through the Collective Security Treaty Organization in winter 2022. However, after the start of the large-scale Russian-Ukrainian war, Moscow had to withdraw this contingent from the territory of Kazakhstan, just as it later had to withdraw its so-called peacekeepers from the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. And now we see how the leaders of the former Soviet republics are looking to anyone, Xi Jinping, Erdogan, anyone but Putin, who is perceived as someone who, firstly, does not respect their sovereignty, and secondly, is unable to use force to change the political situation in the post-Soviet space to his advantage. So what then can Putin do for Ayatollah Khamenei? If a situation arises in Iran where the Ayatollah and his supporters are unable to hold on to power and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is forced to admit the defeat of the theocratic forces that have oppressed Iranians since the so-called Islamic Revolution of 1979, Putin will simply have to acknowledge that yet another regime, which was a significant part of the so-called axis of evil, has lost its ability to destabilize the civilized world. Of course, the Russian president will not like this, but fortunately, there is nothing real he can do to support this criminal regime. So the issue is not even that Putin is cold-bloodedly abandoning the Iranian Ayatollahs to their fate amid Israeli and American bombings, but rather that Putin is also unable to offer any real efforts to help these Ayatollahs win the conflict and retain power in Iran. Russia's role as a global power in the modern world can be forgotten forever. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe, follow me on Patreon, buy me a coffee and Donatello, which helps support the development of these resources. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube. Victory and peace to you. Good luck.